behalf of Festival co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple and all my colleagues at Team of Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. Those of you who missed our earlier session today, Vikram Chandra, the sacred and the profane in conversation with Devapriya Roy, and all of our other sessions with Peter Pan, Margaret Atwood, Coram Toybin, Paul Muldoon, Barkhat Dutt, Shobha Dey, Anubhav Sinha, and so many others. You can catch these on Facebook at JLF Lit Fest or on our YouTube channel, JLF Lit Fest, JLF Lit Fest, Jaipur Lit Fest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our next session today is the Sari, Mukulika Banerjee and Malika Verma in conversation, introduced by Rta Kapur Chishti. A session that explores the beauty, adaptability, and fluidity of India's most iconic garment. Writer and anthropologist Mukulika Banerjee has co-authored The Sari. Malika Verma has spearheaded The Sari, an anthropology of drape. Together, they speak of their relationship and connection with the sari and its timeless history. Rta Kapur Chishti, who is a recognized textile scholar, co-author and editor of Saris, Tradition Beyond, covering 15 states, the previously published Saris of India volumes on Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal, as well as handcrafted Indian textiles, Tradition and Beyond, with Martha Singh and Rahul Jain. She's also collaborated with the Daksha Sheth Dance Company to deliver and develop the dance theatre production titled Sari.
Though the sari is essentially a contemporary garment, as it is always capable of recreation, it does emerge from an underlying aesthetic which needs to be understood to take it further. Though its numerous drapes, which go far beyond the 108 documented in Sari's Tradition and Beyond, published in 2010 with Rory Books by us, in which we look at various forms the sari actually takes. It looks like anything from an unstitched pair of shorts to a long or short dress, to a pair of pantaloons, or even a gown. For instance, any sari of any material cannot be appropriate for any specific wearing style, as a light or heavy cotton, a cotton silk mix, a light silk or a heavy silk will drape entirely differently around the body. And thus, the very structure of a woven sari and its natural raw materials determines its appropriateness for a wearing style. If we are going to show the body, I always say, let's do it in style. And that style is what we have to evolve. Yet, and if you combine it with a pair of leggings, let's do it hopefully in winter, in the 2 months where it is possible to combine, and rather than the 10 months of warm to hot weather. I will end with a quote from Martha Singh, which you always used to love, which went, the more you know, we realize, the less we know, and let's stand by that.
Thank you, Rita, for giving us that perspective. And I'm sorry that some of that, the audio was problematic, but thank you so much. We're delighted to welcome Mukulika Banerjee, the inaugural director of the LSE London School of Economics South Asia Centre, an associate professor in social anthropology at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Her publications include Why India Votes, The Pathan Unarmed, and The Sari, and as editor, Muslim Portraits. She's currently completing a monograph entitled Cultivating Democracy based on 15 years of research in rural India. Malika Verma engaged with India's evolving design languages. Her work intersects craft, cultural identity, and aesthetics. A vocal advocate for India's design and craft communities, she's the founder of Border and Fall, a strategic and creative agency shifting perceptions of made in India. In 2017, she created and produced the Sari Series, an anthology of drape, a digital cultural documentation of India's regional sari drapes. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, remember, if we drop off, just hang in there. We'll be right back on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, the Sari, Mukulika Banerjee, and Malika Verma in conversation. Over to you, Mukulika.
Thank you, Sanjay. Welcome, everyone. What Malika and I thought we'd do is both of us have a very keen interest in the sari and its stories. So we're going to start by talking about how we came to it and why the roots of our obsession. So Malika, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about Bordered Fall, about the extraordinary short films in the sari stories?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So nice to be in conversation, and thank you to the JLF team for having us both. So Border & Fall essentially is a creative and strategic agency that started about 10 years ago at this point, and we work very closely with a number of brands focused on a made in India narrative, where our tagline is very much about shifting perceptions of made in India. And what that means is looking at forward-looking narratives that are very much rooted in where we came from. And so the Sari series is derived very much from that. It's a nonprofit undertaking of Border & Falls. It was released in October 2017 with the lead patronage of Good Earth and a number of other stakeholders. And the idea was essentially to look at a digital anthology of the Sari drapes by documenting through short film the regional drapes of India. And in order to do so, we engaged Rta Kapur Chishti, who just gave the introduction, and her incredible team, who have spent the last 2 decades documenting this through their work. And so the idea was to look at a conversation of the future by documenting and making the past accessible. And so one of the sort of lead questions or lead questionings that led to this project was this continual conversation of in an urban context in India, why aren't women wearing the sari? And so for us, it became quite clear that, I think, and I still stand by this, I think women aren't wearing the saris because generally in urban contexts is because there's been no innovation really in the sari since, let's say, the 1800s, when the blouse and the petticoat were introduced during the Victorian era. And since then, of course, there's been multiple changes in terms of textile, mill production, non-matching blouses, but generally we've stayed within very much the same silhouette, the navy drape, whether it's Indira Gandhi, whether it's you're a politician or in Bollywood, you're seeing it very much in the same silhouette. And so the question very much to us was, what can a sari look like on an urban Indian woman today, or on an urban woman today? And that became very interesting. And so what you see in the Sari series, which is very much in the public domain as a free accessible resource, addresses that through use of maybe jersey fabric, not necessarily focused on the handloom conversation. And till date, we've because it's been 2.5 years, I've been fortunate to see the growth of that digitally. It's been viewed over 1 million times till date, and been very well accepted on Instagram with a lively hashtag, hashtag the Sari series. And so I think that has been, time has told the story of how that has spread, and we've been, one voice of a few, including yourself, working to discuss the Sari. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context. But I know you've been involved, of course, in your own way. You've written a wonderful book a while ago with your own sort of viewpoints. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
So I think it's one of the first things that we tried to do in in discussing the Sari in the book called The Sari. My co-author, Daniel Miller, and I pointed to something that is fairly obvious to any sari wearer or anyone who lives in a context where saris are worn habitually, how completely unlike a stitched garment it is. It's asymmetric to start with, which I see that, Malika, you've created asymmetry in your clothing today, reminiscent of what the sari does. And the fact that so what you present to the world, it's asymmetric, it's a piece of fabric that you fashion into clothing, but the woman is completely in charge of how she drapes it, what she does with it. And as one of our informants, as anthropologists, of course, we talked to women all over India when we did this research. And one of them said to us, she said, wearing a sari is like having a conversation with it all day. It's not like wearing a pair of trousers and a shirt. or even the shalwar kameez, because the entire day you're negotiating your way. It's almost as if the sari has a life of its own. So that's why we call it the lived garment, right? So you can use it and it becomes something that the woman controls to present herself in the different roles that she's presenting to the world. So she could be a commuter and therefore has to tuck the pallu into her waist and keep herself compact. She might get to work and then have to assert authority. So we talk about the power sari, how you can overpower a meeting of alpha males by just walking in a sari, and shifting the balance of equation there. Or you might have to come home and on the way back, have to pick up shopping, come home, do some housework, and you need to tame this unruly lived garment that seems to pull off in its own direction. So I think the conversation about draping styles and the essence of what the sari is as a garment is something that is really worth thinking about, because it's so completely unique as clothing anywhere in the world. So that was, so I think that, so the fact that you're innovating and bringing back the past, so to speak, into the future of empowering women almost to say that, look, hang on, you can make this garment work for you. You don't have to drape it in the way that your moms did. There are different ways in which you can wear it much more like a dhoti, so you have much greater mobility, or that you don't need to have your pallu flying, making you vulnerable to getting it jammed indoors or under, sitting in a swivel chair in a sari is a nightmare because your sari keeps getting caught in it. There are ways in which you need to, you can take ownership of it again. And I think that's where your Sari series has been so utterly empowering.
Well, thank you. I think just to add to that, and I'm wearing a drape from Orissa right now, and so the textile and everything, the color just changes the way things can look. And my point is that there are drapes that are documented and can be documented and very much rooted in, let's say, rural draping, which was had a particular utility or reason. But for me, the most exciting thing of the project, and I said this when someone asked what would be the greatest outcome, is to see people inventing their own drapes. To see people saying, hey, this drape, we've seen people say, this is on a 9-yard sari. I don't have a 9-yard sari, but I'm going to try it with 5. Or you know what? People have sent us images where they're trying to drape and it doesn't work out, but they like it anyways. And that really is, very, very exciting. And so to see that, to be entirely not prescriptive about how people wear it is, I think, very gratifying and a message that over time I realized the increased importance of that, because that's how things stay living and breathing as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned urban India in your opening remarks, and very much the perception all of us have is somehow that the sari in urban India, in a certain demographic, the most visible demographic, the one that travels abroad or is seen in the metropolitan cities, is wearing the sari less and less. There's a danger of it going the kimono way. It becomes the ceremonial dress that you wear at Diwali or wear at a wedding rather than one that you wear to work. It's interesting when we began to do this, because we were working with this perception, of course, like everyone else. When we started to do the research, and this was way back in 2002 when we were doing the research, and it's sort of still vindicated now, that if you look at beyond the middle class demographic that most of us belong to, who would read a book in English, for instance, a large number of Indian women choose to continue to wear the sari. And recently, while we are doing this JLF session by online because of the pandemic has thrown up images of women in the sari in unprecedented ways, right? So we've all of us have been witness to images of workers from cities going back to their villages, literally on the roads, at bus stops, at railway stations. And looking at those images, I could not help but marvel yet again. These women who work in construction or domestic work, or in small SMEs, these are people who also inhabit urban India. And all those women on those hundreds of kilometers that they were walking were still in their saris. So this idea that the sari is somehow an impractical garment, that you can't walk and run in, it impedes movement, is clearly one of perception and experience. And like we said in the book, it's a little bit like driving a car. You learn to drive it, but you really get good at it the more you do it. So you can learn to drape a sari and try one of the many styles, say, on your website, but you really become a mistress of that style the more you do it, and then you begin to get that comfort level.
For sure. And I think it's also a case that, the loudest voice is the one that's heard. And I think for any of us who wear the sari on a regular basis, no one would say that it's difficult to put on. I think I related, if you had to look at a level of ease, it's akin to, I'd say, braiding hair. Braiding hair for someone who's never braided hair before looks incredibly difficult. And the first time it's just feels very foreign, but braiding hair is not at the end of the day, or making a bun, right? A nice bun. And so no one's talking about a French braid or anything fancy, but I think contextualizing it is important. And I think that ease really comes by exploring it. And I think one of the things, I don't wear a petticoat with my saris anymore. And I think that's been actually one of the most liberating things, that over the years, when I've had discussions with a number of women who are trying on the saris, that actually is a very liberating thing. I think the era of the slip in general, whether it's under a dress or a skirt or a kurta, that era has kind of gone from a lot of us. And similarly, I think there's a lot of fear about things just falling off, right? And it's perpetuated by those who that's that one horror story that kind of my sari fell off, or it's like kids. You think all of them are screaming, crying on the plane, but for every kid doing that, there's 15 of them sitting absolutely quietly, right? And doing nothing. You just never notice. And so I think for me, what's been really liberating, and what I've seen in a lot of women, is losing the petticoat, which again was only introduced during, to emulate, sort of Victorian dress, which is why our nannies and all had, all the ruffles under their petticoats. And so doing away with that entirely is a very different experience with the sari. The tensions on the body feel just much more manageable, much more responsive. Like you were saying earlier, you're negotiating all day, but instead of having this singular string tied very tightly around you, if for any of us who've worn sarongs or whatnot, where it's knotted, you generally feel that ease and tightening, and don't worry about it. So yeah, that's you're absolutely right. It is a garment that I think it gets more of a bad rep in terms of difficulty of wearing it than is merited.
And the only way to get over it is just to do it, right? And I certainly found
absolutely.
All the research that I've been doing for the last 20 years or so has been in rural Bengal, where it gets very hot, it gets very wet, and people prefer to, a lot of women, like you said, don't wear a petticoat. I think almost everywhere they do wear a blouse. But what I found very particularly striking was to contrast the conversations that, say, one of my friends in the village where I go back to every year, and friends in Delhi would say, oh, it's impractical, it gets caught, it's uncomfortable to move, versus my friends who are paddy farmers, right? Who need to be able to negotiate multiple audiences when they are, and multiple jobs when they're wearing a sari. So they leave the village with their sari looking as you would expect it to look. But the moment you enter a paddy field with 2 feet of standing water, if you are in any other clothing, you're going to get your clothes wet. Whereas with the sari, the fact that you can just lift it up and tuck it into your waistband, do whatever work you have to do in the field, and then come back. And then, of course, there are other social norms that you're also catering to. It's not just about functionality. you can't walk back into the main village lane with your sari hitched up. Legs are a no-no in India, as we know, in large parts. So you can lower your sari. And what they were saying is that, how can I ever wear a shalwar kameez? Because a shalwar kameez would be so impractical in this kind of, the shalwar would get wet. I would, how would I negotiate it? So in a sense, it's almost as if the unstitched nature of it and the draped nature of it allowed women to inhabit the multiple roles that women are expected to inhabit on a daily basis, regardless of where they live and what they do. And so, in fact, we rather cheekily, I think, but I think convincingly showed in the book that, people say, oh, it looks so traditional, it's so antiquated. And we ran with that idea and actually landed up, having done the research, to say the sari is actually the quintessential modern garment. It is modern because it gives the woman agency. It doesn't fix her look. It allows her to be different people through the day that she is expected to. And if modernity is about being able to be different kinds of selves through the day, then this is the garment for you. So I think that was our conclusion, and it's very encouraging. Since the book came out in 2003, it's been very encouraging to see, I would say, a revival in younger people wearing the sari more than they certainly did 20 years ago. And I think the kind of work that you guys are doing at Border and Fall is precisely the kind of thing to shed that constraining petticoat, to pair it, the whole innovation with blouses that has happened in the last 5 years. And I think celebrities, Bollywood stars have been very good with this, because they have made the sari, made it attractive again. They've made people fall in love with it again, because they're innovating. And that's kind of where things are likely to move in the future, would you say?
Absolutely. I think, you made a few good points. I think, first of all, as a rectangular unstitched piece of cloth, it truly, therefore, becomes infinite in possibilities. And so that is really the power and the genius of it, which therefore encompasses past, present, and future possibilities. So it's all of those in one. And I think that's one of the takeaways of working so closely with the sari and looking at, people say, what have you learned? I'm like, it is just a powerful, powerful garment, whether it's memory, whether it's, the relation to the handloom economy, whether it, it goes on and on and on, milestone markers, coming of age, just so many things. And so earlier you mentioned also this difference between, your friends in the paddy fields in Bengal, and then also those in, let's say in more urban areas going to work. And I think there's been an imposed rigidity on a way to wear the sari in urban context. I don't know if I call it the Air India sort of approach, where there's a perfection. And so similarly, if you're wearing a button-down shirt today and you're working, you will roll up your sleeves if your hands are getting wet, right? You will easily roll up your pant leg as well. But for some reason, and women will do that with the sari in most parts of India, but in certain pockets of it is that there is a protocol and a way. And I've been based in India for 14 years now, but grew up in Montreal in Canada. So have that privilege of having seen sort of the NRI approach, which is very prescriptive and very, you match your blouse, your bindi, your churis, everything. And if your hem is not perfectly aligned all around with the perfect piece, there's just, you've lost the plot. And so, there's that, which tends to, I don't want to say fossilize, but yes, fossilize certain ways of doing things culturally, which, I completely respect and understand where that comes from. But equally in urban India, there's been, this kind of slow change where I'd say one of the largest widespread changes in the sari over the last 20 years has been the move away from a matching blouse to an, contrast blouse, right? That's been the mass sort of trickle down effect on it. But not wearing a blouse or wearing, something else, or not wearing a petticoat, that is yet to happen. And so I think back to, a lot of the public ambassadors of India are those ones who end up traveling. There's a literacy, English, and all that, which have their own problems of why that is the way it is. But the fact is, I think that there is not just a responsibility, but an opportunity within that to embrace and show India being very different. I mean, just as an example, the V&A had a Fabric of India exhibit. It was one of the largest exhibits on textile in India. It was a few years ago, and many of us who had been involved in it in different capacities went to the opening, and we were all, from India, very excited that, there's this exhibition focused on India and on textile. And we got to the opening, and those of us from India had to, and we were asked what we were wearing, and people were saying, that's from India? And then we were looking at, sort of the digital print bandhani and this that had percolated down, and what an opportunity here, because it's, with this set, or with all of them as ambassadors, and unfortunately we don't see design, the changes in design that are happening so wonderfully in India trickling down to the millions of Indians, or those of us from this side of the world, across the world. And I think that is the next sort of big opportunity, that better design for the masses in that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, actually, because I think one of the things that we both of us have talked about amongst ourselves is what's happening with the materiality, the material itself of the sari in India now is a really interesting story, where the handloom sector we've made it, because of the inheritance from Gandhi and its politics and Swadeshi fabric and khadi. We know it is important. There has been, as in the 1980s, an ethnic revolution. The handloom industry was revitalized. It was made fashionable, very importantly. Khadi has always been around. But the economies of scale simply don't work, right? So unless there is a large enough market, certainly we found, looking at the consumer base of handloom, it's less than 10% of the country. I know in my village, the women had, at a minimum, and most women had 3 saris. So one they washed, the other one they wore, and they alternated it. There were 2 saris for daily wear, and the third sari. So these 2 saris were 150 rupee mill saris, right? You can buy them for under 300 rupees now. But, and these are the man-made fibers, the mercerized cotton that is being produced in mills. But their best sari that they wore for weddings, to go to vote, on special occasions, that was a handloom sari. And it was a cotton handloom, right? And that's all you could afford. But that was their pressure. So there's this sense, even this 90% consumer base in India that wears man-made fibers and mill-made saris, that when it's really special, they want a hand-woven sari. And that is an economy that we need to think about, again, in the context of the pandemic. If you think of what's happening with the weaving industry and with weavers, I mean, weavers having to go and break stones in a construction site because weaving is no longer a viable economic activity, means that the mathematics, the skill, the inherited knowledge base of that industry just disappears just like that, because it is not one that you have universities for. It is learnt through doing, through apprenticeships. And if that master weaver or anybody who can weave, I mean, look at the sari, it's woven by, this is not a massively complicated design, but to look at, but it takes a certain kind of thinking and brain to do it. Once that person who knows how to do it has moved away from it and is just doing something as unskilled as breaking stones, we've lost it. So I think, there is also a collective responsibility to create that, to preserve that knowledge system, which maybe one way, is to bring these 2 stories together, is the popularization of wearing the sari more can go hand in hand with an innovation in making handloom more wearable and more economically viable. And if those 2 stories could come together, that would be a real win, wouldn't it?
It would. I think there's just a lot within what you just said. I think we've found ourselves in a situation that we thought was temporary, right? And now seems to be much more permanent. And vis-a-vis addressing, you know, I work with a number of brands who engage hundreds of weavers on their payrolls and give them full ongoing work as a full-time capacity. And conversations went from, okay, how do they work from home with the resources they have? How do we give them bare minimum and not cut their salary and cut everybody else's salary? And you know, month 1, month 2, month 3, and now the problems are unfolding, and the magnitude of them is just unfolding as we're all in this together in that kind of lowest common denominator way of trying to figure out what and how long and what's going to happen. And so they're definitely, I think there's been a lot of wonderful initiatives to help raise funds, to help people that's temporarily. What happens in the long term in terms of production, certainly by popularizing the sari, and that's something that's entirely at the agency of the woman or the man who's wearing it to be able to do. And I think you know, there's still that gap, and which is much more long term. So I think on the craft front, not just in weaving, but across many aspects of those who made their livelihood based on you know, the craft economy, there are much bigger, deeper discussions, and more immediate term solutions would need to kind of be looked at, I think, to temporarily, but kind of tide that over. So it still seems like there's not a clear, you know, direct answer, but there's certainly a lot of scope.
Yeah, but I think we're going to try and wrap up so that we have some time for questions. So I think if people watching want to start sending questions in, I can't see any yet, but we have a lot to say between us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, I think just on the front of you know, when we talk about contextualizing things in terms of urban India or whatnot, or how many women wear the sari, because data continues to be a problem. And as an anthropologist, I'm sure you appreciate this, where that's one of the biggest concerns about making statements, trying to quantify things and measuring impact. I think that's really where a lot of the solutions might lie, if we were to able to understand and quantify how things are segmented, who's wearing what. I mean, when we were looking at the Sari series, tried figuring out about how many women would wear the sari on a daily basis. And based on conservative estimates, I came up with the number of 80 million on a daily basis, which is still like, you know, not a conversation of the sari going anywhere, right? Which is why I've always said too, the sari it's not about the sari dying. It's not about, you know, it's a different conversation. And so data would be very interesting and important as well, which is again, much more long-term, you know, deep initiative.
So Malika, we have some questions. I think I can take one and you can take the other one.
Go ahead. Yeah.
To speak to our strengths. I'll take one just to give you a minute to catch your breath. But the question to you really is about the gender shift and the fact that recently it's been appropriated as menswear as well. And what if you had any comments? I'll take the other question, which is about the sari as an object with a personality, being multidimensional. What is our take? Well, as brand and design experts, I'm neither. Malika is that person and works with them. But I think there is, it sounds like a very masculine question as much. It's not necessarily only from a man. I think women ask this question, what does the wearer bring to the sari? At one level, I think there is, you know, women in their 60s would say to us, you know, I'm not a very good sari wearer. And there is a sort of, you know, it's like, I'm not a great driver kind of self-perception, which is to say, well, I wear a sari, I wear it every day, but I've never really mastered it in the way that my sister can, you know, for instance. This thing is that, and there's a huge amount of social pressure, I think, on exactly as you were saying before, that, you know, it must look perfect. Can you look elegant? Are you, you know, perfectly comfortable? Can you run in a sari? Kind of image that is a sort of Mother India image that is held up, that women are expected to conform to. And partly, I think what we are doing with this conversation is moving away from that perception to say, well, you know, we never say that about tailored clothing. We never say, God, you know, I mean, you really pull off a tailored shalwar kameez in the same way. Maybe you do, it's an aesthetic perception, but the element of skill which a sari requires is something that weighs heavy. But it is true that the same sari can be worn by two different women and look very, very different because the wearer does something to the sari itself. In the same way that two different people can attempt, you can have a woman in a 150 rupee sari look more exquisite and beautiful than somebody in a high-end designer sari who doesn't know how to wear it. So that constant subjective perception of that is true. But Malika, will you take quite a few questions? So will you briefly take on the gender left question? Yeah.
Sure. If you don't mind repeating it, please.
Sorry?
If you don't mind repeating the question. Sorry, the gender
just
question.
About men beginning to wear the sari and whether you had any thoughts on this gender.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I mentioned earlier in this conversation where I said, men and women, and I think it's important to look at the sari first and step back as a draped garment. The sari ranges between 3.5 yards to 9 yards, and within that, we've imposed this distinction of sari, but it's truly a draped garment. So whether it's a lungi, dhoti, whatever it is, that is a draped garment, of which we have so many. I think at a certain point we started using the word sari to denote a certain type of silhouette. So for instance, we used to say, I love your kanjivaram, or I love your baluchari, but now you never said I loved your baluchari sari or kanjivaram sari. So we've added that on. And so I think men have been very much part of the draped equation, actually in many more ways, from, gamchas, turbans, dhotis, lungis, it goes on. And so they're a very important part, have been an important part, and continue to be. What we've seen with the Sari series is wonderful. I think it's opened up an accessibility to just learning how to do it. And we continue to see an incredible range of men, and that's some of my favorite, trying on the Sari drapes. And wearing them, which is fantastic. And in fact, Q, who is one of the filmmakers, who's also from Calcutta, he just had a lockdown sari challenge to raise money for weavers, and so he challenged men on Instagram to drape the sari using the film that had been created for the Sari series, and that's been really interesting to see. So I think men have continue to remain, an important part of the sari, conversation. And also, I mean, they're also the ones who tend to make, sell, promote. If you look at it, it's a garment overwhelmingly worn by women, but men are such an important part of that side. And his film, is called Sari Men and looks at that very closely.
That sounds like a great project, actually.
Yeah,
in fact, the related question to that about weavers, which we did talk about towards the end, but whether something can be done, I think people are deeply worried, and you're the one with the business brains. Do you think we can somehow have a campaign for handloom? I mean, literally, there are our weavers are starving at the moment.
Sure, and I think it's a supply demand equation. I think what people can do, sure. I think we all inherently know that many people are struggling right now, and so we can buy handlooms. We can we can continue to, keep the demand, if not increase it, sustain it, which is very difficult because suddenly the weddings you're buying for, the this, that have all gone out. So I would say continue to buy, and that translates. I mean, and like I said, if one can in the interim support financially directly, then that's wonderful, or through organizations who are raising money directly with 100% of proceeds going. But that isn't a long-term solution, as we all know. And people don't want that on the receiving end of aid, they want to be able largely to work and earn. And so I think the important thing is to keep, as we know, people stay in craft or in work if they're continuously occupied. Being continuously engaged on your loom is one of the most important things. Similarly, we need to get to a point where we can have them, reason to be on the loom, which is from, I think, like I said, just consuming as well.
I think a very good outcome of this session would be that everyone watching pledges to buy 2 saris in the next month and persuades 10 other people to do the same. I think we have to take ownership of this process a little.
And it's a wide range. You're absolutely right. I think whether you're looking to spend 1,500 rupees or 15,000, there's a very wide range within that. Even though handloom remains more, of an elitist conversation, I would say, buy directly, support, and there's a lot of campaigns already out there. And I think on a basic human level, we know that people are in need because they don't have work.
Yeah, there are a couple more questions, and then there's a final question from one of the festival directors, which both of us must answer, Malika. But we'll do it at the end. Namitaji has a question, but there are two questions. I think I'll attempt at answering one and part of the second, and you can do the second one yourself as well. The first one is a question about Pakistan, which is partly because I've lived and worked in Pakistan, and the question of what the status of the sari there is. And it's true that on recent visits in the last 5 years that I've been going to Pakistan, it's completely usual to see women in saris at evening parties. And I haven't seen women at work in saris in Pakistan, but in offices and universities, but I certainly saw them in the evening. So there is a tradition of, I have a number of friends who will say that a certain class and maybe a certain vintage of Pakistani who moved from the East continues to have these sari wearing traditions, but they don't, they haven't passed it on. So younger women, I don't know about. Now, somewhere in all of this story, I wanted to pick up on this discussion because somewhere in this story, the shalwar kameez has become Islamic dress and the sari isn't, and and so on. And it's a very bizarre issue because there is actually nothing in the provenance of either garment that associates it with any religion. Where I work in Bengal, all the women I was talking about are all Muslim, and it would be absurd to say that they should be wearing something else. You wear regionally there is some, of course, the sari is not worn in all parts of India. India is a very wide and varied space. So I think we'll have to leave it at that. And I'll briefly answer the second question, and Malika, you must take it too, about what has Bollywood stars wearing the sari done to the sari, right? Has it made it a glamorous item of clothing that you wear on the red carpet rather than something that you wear on buses and go to work and teach in universities and go to office in? And all I can say is that two things. One is just from personal experience. For 30 years that I've lived in the UK, I teach at LSE. I wear a sari to work at least twice a month. It rains a lot in Britain, which ruins saris, but I tend to wear them. And I know it's hard, but doing the escalators and the tube stations and commuting in a sari in London is a challenge. But I think it's worth doing, and I'm hoping that a lot of younger women say, "Oh my goodness, you wore this sari at 8 a.m. and it's already 10 o'clock at night and you want to say," so I think it's a sense of people feeling empowered enough to do it. But with the Bollywood celebrities, I think the fact that they made it, they want, there was a phase when everybody wore these gowns and they wore these dresses for red carpet openings. And the fact that they don't do now is somehow there's a new pride in, oh, look, we have our own glamour culture has come back. So it's a little bit like, what you wear at a fashion show is not what you wear in real life, but it sets trends. And I think it has that effect. I don't know whether you agree, Malika.
Well, I agree that Bollywood still remains one of the if not the largest media vehicle for a mouthpiece of India, and so certainly by Bollywood stars wearing it, and there is a validation that the public sees, and that's wonderful. Is there more that can be done? Are there more opportunities, whether it's through drape or experimentation? Sure, but the fact that it's still there is wonderful. And important. But that being said, I think, when we looked in our research at the kind of icons that come to mind when you think about the sari, Indira Gandhi still rung clear across generations very much. And so that's also, I think, very interesting to note as well.
Okay, so I think we're kind of out of time. I'm sorry, there was a question about who are the Kamala Devi Chattopadhyayas of modern era. And I think there are plenty. I mean, they're not iconic in the same way because these were big names. They were part of the nationalist movement. There was a nationalist fervor in setting up the Crafts Council or KVIC and so on. But there are a lot of of people out there doing fantastic work. And in social media times, there is no excuse not to find them. So hopefully, people will go out and look for the new Kamala Devis of India today. So final question from Namita Gokhale. What are your favorite regional saris, your personal favorite, Malika?
Regional saris in terms of textiles. I am
or you can do drape, I can do textile. Why don't we do it like that?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's easy. I mean, I'm partial to those owned by my nanny's well-worn suti saris. I think those, just that soft, Bengal cotton. That's something that I'm very partial to. Drape-wise, I drape my own. I wear it shorter. I wear it in a way that works for me. So I found that comfort zone. I certainly love this drape, the one from Rta, and there's so many more, so it's hard to say. It's like, picking your favorite. It's truly favorite within an infinite buffet of wonderful choices. So thankfully, we don't have the need to pick. But in terms of weave, I'm also very partial to Tangelia from Gujarat. I think it's an extraordinary weave, and we don't see enough of it. So very, very partial to that as well. Go ahead, Mukulika.
I'm going to be very predictable, as a Bengali woman, and having had a Bengali mother who I saw her in nothing but a sari all her life. I think summer, it's very season oriented as well. For a hot Delhi summer, nothing like a Bengal cotton, but without starch. I think starch makes it really quite 100%. Uncomfortable. But also Rajasthan kota. I think kota in hot summers are wonderful. In the winter, I would say, you can't beat Banarasi silks or indeed Kanchipuram. So styles, I'm now inspired by your website, and I'm going to go off and try some of these other styles which look empowering. And I really urge everyone listening, watching, to please go and check the website out and have a go yourselves. Thank you very much. Okay. Over to Sanjay.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And it takes me back, Mukulika, 20 years when we first released the Sari book at the distillery or wherever it was.
Truman Brewery in London. Sanjay organized. That's right.
Great Arc exhibition, incredible. And the one thing that perhaps both of you didn't quite touch upon is the fact that the sari drapes on the Indian woman's figure the best and allows you to reveal or conceal as you wish, using the garment, as both of you talked about. And thank you for that. And yes, there's been a number of schemes, in fact, even as we speak, which have been going around, buy two saris, keep the weaving community alive. Vimor, which is the organization from where Mrs. Gandhi used to buy her saris, and of course Sonia Gandhi also buys her saris, Pavitra, etc. They're continuing to work to revive many of the stitching patterns and getting people to buy it. So I do hope everybody out there will go out and buy, most importantly, hand-woven. And again, what we forget when you buy a hand-woven sari, I get so many people asking, especially in Benares, why is this so expensive? Remember, it takes 3 months of intense labor of trying to create this masterpiece, which of course earlier used to go as part of a trousseau, but can now become a piece of inheritance that you pass on. So that whatever it is, it still doesn't value the work that the artisan or the weaver or the dyer or the person who spun the yarn, etc., all collectively put together. You still don't get the value of that when you go and buy a sari. So please do, and perhaps don't bargain it down, because you are then in many ways not really appreciating the incredible craft of that sari, but the 30 years that weaver has taken in terms of learning that craft. So on that note, thank you both so much. And thank you to all our viewers. And I'm sorry again that we couldn't take all the questions, and maybe we will pass them on to Malika and Mukulika, and they can both answer them, and we will put it up on Facebook. Thank you to our official radio partners, Red FM, Bajate Raho. And please do remember to log in on Friday, the 3rd of July for another set of great sessions. We start with Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Toby Walsh in conversation with Jaspreet Bindra. Are we sleepwalking into the intelligence future? Professor of Artificial Intelligence, Toby Walsh, examines the impact of AI on the uncertain present and fast evolving future, where AI applications are embedded in every aspect of human life, and discusses the need for strategic thinking to protect and promote human rights in the context of new technologies. And this is at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the second session on Wednesday, the 3rd of July, will be Women and Work. Lakshmi Puri and Pragya Tiwari in conversation on the Indian women's participation in the workplace as it's decreasing with the pandemic creating further fault lines. A rebalance of the workforce could help kickstart economic growth and also pay social dividends. This will be at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. See you all on on Friday the 3rd at 8:30 p.m. Have a great week.